Good morning, everybody. It is November 15th. I have Senator Black with us today. We are going to speak about something that has been in the news recently, which is the first visit of any Syrian president, like not the one that we would hope for, but we're going to speak about who this man truly is and kind of the events that led up to him taking over Syria. So I want to go ahead and pass it over to you, Senator Black.
Yes, Morgan. Good morning. And President Trump has just recently hosted the brand new president of Syria. He calls himself al-Shara. His actual name is Mohammed al-Julani. Al-Julani was the founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, just so that you know, Al-Qaeda is the group that flew passenger jets into the Pentagon and the Twin Towers on 9/11 back in 2001, killing 3,000 American citizens, many of whom jumped and fell roughly a quarter of a mile down from these gigantic towers to their death rather than be immolated in the blazing inferno. Now, it was after 3,000 Americans were murdered in this horrific way that this man that you see on the screen, this is Mohammed al-Julani, and he swore allegiance to the head of the global Al-Qaeda and to the whole organization. Now, this was not his first, well, let's see, I guess, yes, this was not his first experience of doing it, because he had earlier worked with the top leader of ISIS, the horrific terror organization. He was part of ISIS, and then he was spun off to go and set up Al-Qaeda in Syria. Probably as evil a human being as you can find. I know of nothing that Adolf Hitler did that began to eclipse this man's record. Now, it took, Syria was so united. The country, it was not a wealthy country. It was not like one of these big oil companies in the Middle East, but it had a very bright core of individuals, particularly the Christians and the Alawites. And the Alawites are broadly known throughout the Middle East as the Friends of Christians. And this is because, like the Christians, they tend to be rather modern in their outlook. They care about the rights of women. They care about press freedom, religious freedom, things of this sort. And they reject this idea of the harsh Islamic law, the very brutal 7th century type of slaughter and so forth that's encouraged by early Islam. So we have this fellow, al-Shara. He now calls himself. What happened after 13 years of war, just relentless warfare, promoted by the Central Intelligence Agency, beginning with the administration of Barack Obama. And after 13 years of starvation, blockades, and just relentless Central Intelligence Agency operations, the army collapsed, and President Assad had to leave the country. He's in Moscow now with a number of his key advisors. And so this fellow al-Shara emerges. Now, he was, this is the present president of Syria. he had led a group of the most radical of all of the rebels in Syria who had fought for years and years. And the Al Qaeda in Syria, they had called themselves Al Nusra, and then they changed their name as people began to realize how horrific they were, changed it to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. I think the CIA played some very, very strategic mind games to keep the American people from comprehending what was happening in Syria as we worked together with Israel to try to overthrow this government that posed somewhat of a barrier to Israel's desire to expand and to take over additional lands. And so anyway, when the Syrian army finally collapsed, it collapsed rather quickly at the very end. And al-Shara, who had been known as Mohammed al-Jilani, he took off his uniform, he put on a suit, he slicked down his hair, he changed his name, and he declared himself to be a moderate. And right away, the Western media began to talk about, oh, how terrible the old president was, President Assad. He had been so terrible. There were cars found around the presidential palace, and so he must have owned them, and some of them were worth a lot of money. So clearly, he was doing things that he shouldn't have been doing. It was just bizarre. There was no evidence to support anything that they were doing, but at this point, there was nobody defending President Assad and the administration of Syria. So you had this new guy who takes over, and he changes his name to al-Shara. Now, he had a $10 million bounty on him as a special terrorist. There was, I actually have a screenshot of it somewhere, of the FBI having him on there as for $10 million. There was one with the State Department. They had him on their list for $10 million. And I guess this is him right on the screen, $10 million reward. So he takes over, and he gets a shave, and he's got his hair changed, not wearing a turban anymore. He's got on a Western suit. And so he puts together a cabinet, and his Minister of Justice is a man who was very shortly afterwards revealed on video sentencing women to death for I don't know what, having intercourse with someone. And there's one woman she's a married woman, and she begs, as she's about to be executed, begs to see her children one more time before she dies. And the Minister of Justice, the giver of all justice, said, no, shoot her. And somebody blows her brains out right on the screen. So this was the kind of justice that the new leader has imposed. He had other very notorious people in his cabinet. One of the first things he did is he did away with the Constitution of Syria, the Constitution which I have read myself, and that Constitution guaranteed religious freedom in 3 different parts of the Constitution. It guaranteed women's freedom and equality, and it recognized that Syria had had a long ways to go, and it was sort of it sort of said, this is what we intend to achieve. Not only does the woman have equality, but we intend to expand it. Now, women were fully integrated into the university system. Women were not required to dress in any certain way under the Syrian government at the time, even to the time of its fall. And so it was a very advanced, very westernized form of constitution. And the culture of Syria was far more westernized than any other country in the Middle East. Women truly were free and they were equal. And I met, I think, almost every member of the Syrian parliament, and women were heavily represented, and women from all different factions. And this is one of the photos with several of the parliamentarians who, the way that Syria worked, you had the presidency, and then you had sort of a unitary legislature, but they were very powerful and they did very good work. And these are three of them standing beside myself and a fellow who was with me on this trip, and so they represented every faction of life in Syria. You had Christian legislators, some men, some women. You had Alawites, the Friends of Christians. These were from the faction that President Assad was from. Very, very bright, very advanced individuals. You had Muslims of various different groups. You have the Kurds. You had the Druze. Every faction of Syria was well represented by the Syrian parliament, and this was never disclosed by the American media. Now, you don't have any female representation in Saudi Arabia, our closest ally. You don't have any female representation in the legislature such that they have in Kuwait, the country that we went to war against Iraq for. And the nation of Syria was intensely anti-terrorist. They worked with us, they cooperated with us after 9/11 when we were trying to figure out where these people came from and so forth. And so they, the idea that somehow we were after them because they were pro-terrorist was absurd. It was just terrible. Now, General Wesley Clark, the former head of, he was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO in Europe, and he disclosed that shortly after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon, and one of his friends, a very, very high level 3 or 4 star general, told him, "Hey, did you know that we're going to attack Iraq?" He said, "Why?" He said, "I don't know. I guess just because we need to." And anyway, over the next couple of months, he discovered that the United States planned to bring down 7 nations in 5 years. There was a list in the Pentagon, in the State Department, and none of these countries was a country that was behind terrorism. None had been involved in the 9/11 attacks. And we did not intend to attack any country that was associated with 9/11, which is rather peculiar. Why not go after Saudi Arabia, where almost every one of the hijackers came from.
Mhm.
Well, no. Instead, we covered up Saudi Arabia's involvement in the 9/11 hijackings, including proof that some very, very top Saudi Arabian officials donated to help train the terrorists in flying the aircraft. So here we were going after all of these countries. Well, one thing that they had in common is that Israel was very interested in having them all brought down.
Mhm.
And so I started watching what was going on in 2011 when we conducted an unprovoked attack on the nation of Libya. Libya was the most successful country in all of Africa. Very well led. The leadership was Colonel Gaddafi was very devoted to his people. He provided housing to them. There was free education up to the PhD level. Libya was a very wealthy place before we invaded it. And so they could do things of that sort. But they were very active with education. And so the U.S. attacked them. And I knew a little bit about Libya, became curious. Well, why are we attacking Libya? It must be something to do with the oil. And so I started looking into it with that particular interest in mind. And lo and behold, I discovered that there were a couple of reasons, but the one most relevant to what we're talking about is the fact that we had loaded up Libya with all sorts of advanced weapons, including ground-to-air missiles, which had not gotten into any private hands at this point. And Colonel Gaddafi was most anxious to keep good relations with the United States. If we said buy all of this stuff, he bought it. He wanted to keep us happy. And then, as it turned out, we promoted an uprising in Benghazi, which is the second largest city in Libya. And we did it by working with Al-Qaeda. They called it the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, but it was their version of Al-Qaeda in Libya. So here we are. It's just 10 years after the Twin Towers go down and 3,000 Americans are killed. 10 years later, we are actively working with Al-Qaeda, the group that brought it all about, which makes you wonder, were we working with them during 9/11? I think that's very possible that there were elements of the US government at the very highest levels that were actively working together with Saudi Arabia to carry this out. But in any event, I discovered that what was happening is we had funneled CIA agents into Benghazi, and they had worked with this Libyan Islamic fighting group, and they took over the city. And in order, they had to provoke something, so they began to take civil servants, the people who made out the pension checks, sort of like Social Security, people who were post office workers, just perfectly non-political people, and they began marching them up on the tops of multi-story buildings and just throwing them off. And the crowds would roar and say, oh, you know, they would applaud. And it was Colonel Gaddafi said, we've got to do something. And he said, we're going to send military force in. We're going to crush this uprising that's murdering innocent, helpless civil servants. And that was all that we needed. Based on that, we said, well, we need to impose a no-fly zone because this man is becoming a tyrant. He's interfering with the fun that these terrorists are having, throwing people off buildings. Well, we didn't say it that way, but the idea is, oh, we can't have him, slaughtering people. So he had a small military force preparing to go into Benghazi. With John McCain was the big pusher for this. He and Hillary Clinton worked together to orchestrate this, with the CIA, of course, at the heart of it. And they hyped up propaganda. They got people all thinking there's something bad going on by the government. And we began bombing. And we bombed the military forces that were going in to restore order in Benghazi. And in the course of it, then we began this huge bombing campaign. And the French and the British, I believe, actually began the first bombings. And then we were the real muscle behind it. And we came in. And so we bombed and bombed. And in the course of all of this, Turkey, which has always been involved in trying to overthrow Syria, they took over a captured airfield in Libya. And we began looting all of the arsenal from Libya and loading planes that were flown in from Qatar. They were loaded up and then they were sent to CIA warehouses in Turkey and right across the border from Syria. So we captured this enormous arsenal of Libyan weapons by crushing the government, destroying it, and destroying the whole country. The country has never recovered from the brutal attack on it. And we moved those Libyan weapons not into Syria, because Syria was still very well defended and peaceful. We put them right on the border within Turkey, and the CIA operated those warehouses under a program that was very top secret called Project Timber Sycamore. Now it's been disclosed. It's, I never reveal anything that's not public information. But what we were doing is our ultimate objective was not so much, we had reasons we wanted to bring down Libya, but our real target was Syria. The reason for this is that Israel had long had its eye on Syrian land and resources. And they had occupied the Golan Heights, which the United Nations had never recognized that as belonging to Israel. And they had a tremendous interest in taking down Israel, taking down Lebanon, and expanding their domain, crushing the people in Gaza, expelling the people from the West Bank. And it was sort of the Nazi idea of Lebensraum, living space, where Germany said, we're going to expand, we're going to take over more lands so that the German people can expand. Same exact thing with Israel. We're going to push out, we're going to take land from other people and force those people, we're going to exterminate them or drive them out and expand the boundaries of Israel. So this is what happens. Libya eventually falls, but then we begin the war against Syria. And the way that we did it, this involved NATO. It started with this gas attack in Damascus, which we blamed on Syria, and we very nearly launched a military invasion of Syria. We claim that President Assad, who's a very mild-mannered individual, a very peaceful man who never wanted war, never liked bloodshed. We claim that President Assad was a tyrant because there had been demonstrations and uprisings which were provoked by the CIA and MI6, Mossad, and we claimed that he was too harsh in putting those down. Evidence suggests that this was a classic intelligence operation where you have genuine demonstrations and genuine police activity to, make sure people are not in the roads and so forth. And then you have snipers who began firing from the rooftops, and they kill a police officer. Then they kill a demonstrator, then a police officer, then a demonstrator. And both sides think that the other one is shooting at them. But in fact, it is people working for CIA, MI6, Mossad, whoever. And in fact, in the early demonstrations, President Assad, this is at the very beginning of the war in Syria, he knew that there were efforts to provoke a war. And so when he sent police in to control these demonstrations, he did not allow them to carry firearms. He had them carry wooden truncheons, nightsticks. And nonetheless, there were demonstrators who were shot by these unarmed police officers. Well, they weren't shot by the police officers; they were shot by the intelligence agents who were stirring this all up. Now, so you take this country of Syria, which was totally at peace. The people were unified. There was a very unique spirit of religious harmony. And it wasn't just religious tolerance, which is where there's something you don't like, but you put up with it. This was harmony, where there was a genuine love between most Christians and most Muslims. And the CIA, in a very secret cable that was revealed by WikiLeaks, made the point that there was a vulnerability that perhaps if we could stir up religious hatred between some of the Sunnis and some of the Christians and the other elements, that would give us some leverage to weaken the government of President Assad. And so that was what we did. And then there were some very radical areas within Syria that always were a little bit problematic. And we went in and we got those people stirred up to where they actually were wearing these sandwich boards, where they have a board on both sides and somebody's walking around. And they had sayings on there that said, Alawites and Christians to the grave. And they would parade around on the streets with that. And then in one city, on a particular night that was designated, they went to the homes and the businesses of all Christians, and they marked them with a pejorative Arabic term. It was kind of like using the N word, only it was for Christians. And they marked every home, every building with this thing. And then the next day at prayers, the imams in this very radical area told the people, it's time to take over. It's time to drive the infidels out. And of course, these weren't infidels. These were Syrians, but they practiced Christianity, or they were the Alawites, the friends of Christians, who were very modern in their and very westernized in their approach. And so there was this tremendous violent uprising. All of the Christians, every single Christian, was driven out. There were about 20,000 who fled this one city. They left their homes, they left their businesses behind. And where did they go? Well, they went to Damascus. They went to the city where President Bashar al-Assad was, because they knew that he would always protect the minorities. It wasn't just Christians, but all minorities, whether it was the Druze or the more moderate Sunni Muslims or the Shia Muslims. He was always the protector of the minorities, and he was the unifier of the country. The CIA was very active, and they had agents within the country. They had agents training the terrorists, Al-Qaeda. So here it was. Think about this. 10 years, just 10 years is a very short time. Just 10 years after 3,000 Americans were killed in this country, the Central Intelligence Agency has agents who are training that same identical group in how to overthrow a moderate country with the most advanced, westernized constitution in the entire Middle East. And why? Because Israel had its eye on lands that they wanted to take from Syria. And even this far back, the presidential administration was devoted to carrying out the will of Israel. So this goes on, and there were several presidential elections where there was such an outpouring of support for President Assad. Over the years, the war goes on and on and on. And finally, the last election, where there was just this enormous outpouring, just people filling the streets of major cities, because this was their time where they could declare to the world that we support our government and we don't want the West to bring it down. We don't want terrorists to run the country. And then it was John Kerry, who was the Secretary of State at the time of that last presidential election in Syria. And he flew in just long enough. He flew into, I forget whether it was somewhere in Lebanon or something. And he announced that, he said, these elections are big, fat nothing. And then he said, maybe it's time that we move on to Plan B. So what was Plan B? Plan B was where the United States then set up a rump government with the Kurds. And we began saying in all the Western press, well, the Kurds, they deserve their own country. They've fought against ISIS. They ought to get a country of their own. Well, we didn't have any interest. The government had no interest in the Kurds. But what we did want is we wanted to control northern Syria, which was the breadbasket for all of the country, all of the people of Syria. And it produced the wheat, and it also produced the bulk of the oil. Now, Syria is not a big oil exporter, but it had enough to where it could sell oil on the world market, and it would generate currency that it could then use to purchase medical supplies and different things that it needed. So we set up the rump government in in northern Syria, and we put the Kurds in charge. And then the idea was we stole all of the food that fed the entire nation, and we imposed a famine on Syria. We starved the people, and we also cut them off from the oil, which they used both for foreign currency, so they had no foreign currency, and also it was used to produce gasoline so that their trucks could bring produce to market and so forth. And so we literally, deliberately imposed a regime of starvation on an entire nation. And that was the reason that at the end of the 13 years, we had a complete naval blockade on Syria for 13 years. We devalued their currency. We blew up Beirut Harbor in Lebanon. We had a ship explode just shortly after we had declared that we were going to really, really tighten down on the sanctions, and we knew that Syrians did a lot of banking in the banks in Beirut, Lebanon. So we blew up the ship, destroyed the whole harbor, crushed the economy of Lebanon, and we tightened the noose to where there was nothing that Assad could do for his people. He had no resources, nothing. And this is the reason that at the end he couldn't pay his soldiers. So the soldiers slipped away and did other things. And it was just a hollow army at the end. And then just after Biden lost the election, he decided, okay, let's do this. He wanted to knock off Syria for a long time. Mm-hmm. He got together with Syria, with Turkey, Great Britain, always, and Mossad, I'm sure, was involved in this. And they did a big operation where they paid off the generals to disappear at the right time, and the whole thing collapsed. Mm-hmm. So this is when this man comes in, Mohammed al-Jilani, and now here he is with President Trump. And there have been articles that said, well, President Trump is, he's just being very pragmatic about it. You have to deal with the people who are governing. Well, I get that. But what about the people that this man is slaughtering today? Innocent, helpless people. He has his people have attacked the Kurds. We used to love the Kurds. The media was crazy when we were trying to set up that rump government so that we could bring down the country. We adored the Kurds. All of a sudden, nobody cares about the Kurds. Mm. And you don't hear a whisper about the Kurds. And here, the new government, they're fighting the Kurds. They're trying to slaughter the Kurds. The Turks are coming across and they're killing the Kurds. We don't care about the Kurds. And I told the Kurds long ago during the war, I said, you better watch out, because the U.S., I said, is setting up a completely non-functional rump government. I said, you're surrounded by enemies on every side. You don't control the air corridors out. You don't control the highway egress out. You're totally landlocked. And I said, the time will come. I said, you watch, mark my word. If you decide that you're going to take over this area and not cooperate with your country, with your home country of Syria, I said, you're going to pay a price, because there'll be no one to defend you. So now the Kurds are, they're discovering that's exactly the case. The U.S. we don't give a rip about the Kurds. It's out of the media. and the Druze, who are closer to the Israeli side, they have been set upon and slaughtered by the Bedouins, who are the very radical elements. They're the sort of the desert, the camel drivers and that kind of thing, and the Alawites especially. The Alawites are the friends of the Christians, and they were descended upon by Al-Shura's men, and they took them out in the most brutal way. I've watched videos where they would just herd together Alawite men, and then they would just drive them through the streets like cattle. Some of them, if they were injured or something, they'd have to crawl, and then they'd take them out. And you watch them, and I watched them, and they would just taunt them, and then they would murder them. And they murdered thousands of Alawite. And then they said about kidnapping the wives and the daughters of these men, because this is the form of Islam that they're taught, is that you possess the women that you seize with your strong right arm. This is from the Quran. And so this is what they did. We have very little communication anymore because so many have been slaughtered and killed off. But at one point, we knew of roughly 500 Syrian women who had been captured and taken off as sex slaves. And this is not just the way that it works with this group is if a girl is 9 years old, she is capable of intercourse, and there's no requirement to have consent with this 9-year-old. You take what you capture, and typically that means that down to about 7 years old, the terrorists have intercourse with these little girls. So they've done it. They have kidnapped for sex slaves the Alawites. They've done it also with the Druze. And so they are just descending like monsters. I mean, I know all of the things that are said about the Nazis back 75 to 100 years ago. But I never heard that they engaged in campaigns of mass orchestrated rape that were condoned by their religious values. That didn't happen in Germany. And the other thing is that under these people, under the Al-Qaeda in Syria, which was run by this new president, Al-Shura, they beheaded tens of thousands of people. And I don't like to watch horror movies because they just really turn me off. I just don't like that stuff. But because I wanted to understand and have a thorough grasp of the war in Syria during the many years that I studied it, I watched hundreds of videos of innocent people being beheaded by these people that al-Shura now commands as his government. And these were fine, decent people. They were prisoners of war often. They'd be in their uniforms, and they loved to just chase them through the desert. They'd strip them to their underwear, chase them, humiliate them, and then they would line them up. They loved to do this. They'd line up the prisoners of war, and then they would behead them. They wouldn't do it all at once. They would do it in line so that the ones who were being beheaded could watch the other ones being beheaded. This is the level of cruelty and evil of these people. And so when I hear that the president is simply being pragmatic, and I'm a great supporter of President Trump, but I'm not a supporter of what he's done here. I think it's just evil. It's wicked. It's something we shouldn't do. The people who say he's just being pragmatic are forgetting the fact that Syria never would have fallen if it was not for orders from the White House.
Mm-hmm.
White House ordered, you will conquer Syria, you will bring it down, and we used this pretext that there was poison gas that was killing people, and as it turned out, there was something that went wrong in one of our operations, the big one, the red line gas attack that happened under Obama, where we're just about to attack and send U.S. troops ashore. And it turned out that what happened is that a couple of months prior to that red line gas attack in Damascus, in Turkey, which at that time was still not a bad country. It hadn't been taken over by Erdogan. And the Turkish Border Patrol discovered a group of Al-Qaeda operatives that were about to move from Turkey into Syria. They did extensive wiretaps, tremendous criminal investigation of this network, and then they came down on them. They arrested all of them, and they captured 2.2 kilograms of sarin gas, extremely deadly sarin gas. That's about 5 pounds of sarin gas, which is a lot of sarin. And and the sarin gas, it turned out, had been supplied by NATO countries. We don't know, the trail becomes attenuated, but we know that it was Western countries that provided the precursors for the production of sarin gas. So these people have the means of production for sarin gas. They had physical sarin gas in their possession. They were about to cross the border into Syria when they were captured, and they were indicted, and they were about to go to trial. And then Erdogan, who was not the president at the time, but he had great power, he replaced the prosecutor with his own prosecutor, who then dismissed the cases, released them all, and they were allowed to continue and to go into Syria, where they went and they traveled to Damascus with the sarin gas, and they when they got there, they planned an action to release gas. There may have actually been an accident. They may have intended it to be used against the Assad people, but the terrorists who were operating and actually held a portion of Damascus, they weren't familiar with the sarin weapons, and there was an accidental release. It did kill a number of people. I don't know, it could have been 100 or could have been 200 people. Immediately, this was blamed on President Assad. Mm-hmm. And all of the evidence suggested that when the gas was released, there was this horror within the Syrian high command, and different senior officers were demanding to know who had released gas, because Syria did have gas at that time. But President Assad had refused authority to use it, and they never did use it against enemy forces or civilians or anybody else. But they were always dogged by the terrorist who would release it. And not one journalist, when all the journalists descended on Damascus to see what was going on, not one would ask if President Assad felt so desperate to defend his government against the terrorist armies, why would he use poison gas against his own civilian people in his own capital city and not use it against the dozen divisions of terrorist forces who were converging on the capital? Not a well, not a single journalist said, "Oh, what about this?" See, they all knew there was a fear that if you stood in the way of this plan to take over Syria, your career as a journalist was over. So you never had a probing question ever. And so this is what has taken place. And I think we've got a few photos of trips that I took over there. I went there before Tulsi Gabbard. I was the first American official, and then Tulsi Gabbard followed shortly thereafter. She did a wonderful job of also exposing what was going on. Here's a picture. I had flown into Palmyra. Now, Palmyra was under attack by a massive army of ISIS terrorists. And these weren't just sort of ragtag guerrillas. These were terrorists who had received American arms that were captured in Iraq, and they had the most modern artillery. They had tanks. They had huge amounts of trucking and so forth, and it was a huge force. And the Syrian army, in just one of the most dramatic reversals, they had been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and suddenly they launched a counterattack, and they caught ISIS off guard, and they defeated them, and they drove them back to the outskirts of the city of Palmyra. I was in Palmyra while ISIS, the terror group, was fighting with the Syrian army. And as I was driving with a small convoy, very heavily armed people who were following me, I was in their convoy. And I never liked to just be told where to go, because, countries always want to put on the best face. So I would just say, I want to go there. And I was in charge of the convoy. If I wanted to go, that was, no one was going to second guess. So we were going by an airfield that had been recaptured from ISIS. And I said, I want to go down there. And so they drove me down. I went inside, and they had these huge concrete revetments that protected the aircraft inside. And there was a very large MiG jet. They're loaded with bombs, and the pilots were actually in the cockpit. As soon as the buzzer would go off in the hangar, they would get ready and they would roll out and they'd go into battle. And so I went in. The pilots came down out of the cockpit, and you can see the two of them they've got their flight helmets, they've got their shoulder harnesses for their parachutes, and they came down to listen to me speak. And the others are the ground crew, the avionics, electronic people, the sheet metal mechanics who would repair bullet holes and things. And And I told them, I said, the stand that you are making here, the stand that Syria is making, I said, it's enormously heroic. I said, you're fighting against 2/3 of the world's industrial and economic might. Here you are, a small country of 22 million people, fighting against all of this. I said, you are not only defending the people of Syria, but you are defending the entire civilized world. Because if Syria falls, there's going to be a gradual movement towards Europe. And I said, it's likely that at some point Europe will fall. And of course, we see the gradual transformation of Europe today. But in any event, as you look, these are very bright people. They are very dedicated, enormously heroic people. And this was on the airfield. The battle was raging just miles from where we were. And so that was one picture. Do you have the next one there?
Yes, let's go ahead and put it up.
I met twice with President Bashar al-Assad. Here's a picture in his office. Very mild-mannered individual, rather soft-spoken. He never wanted to be the leader of a country. He wanted to be a physician, and he was training in London, in England, to be a physician. His wife, Asma Assad, magnificent woman, she had no interest in being the head of anything. She worked for Goldman Sachs, and she was about to travel to Harvard to take postgraduate work at Harvard. Extremely intelligent people, both. And they came to Syria because his brother, who was a more gritty, hands-on type of guy, he had an auto accident. He was killed, which was a great tragedy for his father. And so the elder Assad called Bashar and ordered him back to the country. He said, you have to come back. And so Bashar al-Assad married the love of his life, Asma. And I could tell at one point she was in the meeting with us, and you could tell this was a young couple, and you just could sense the enormous love and affection between the two of them. And of course, they were being demonized by the Western press, which, would sort of, say all things about them without giving them the opportunity to respond. And so I got to know President Assad. I visited with him on 2 different occasions. And during one great siege that they had in the city of Deir al-Azor, it was besieged by ISIS for years, and the Syrian army was just about to break through. And I sent word to President Assad that I would like to be dropped by helicopter into the city of Deir al-Azor and be the first person to break the siege of Deir al-Azor. And that was conveyed to the president, and he sent back a response that he said, that's just too dangerous. Well, it was very dangerous, but everybody was in danger. And I thought, well, if I could drop in, that would be newsworthy, to where people would say, what the heck is this guy doing? Why do we have an American senator, state senator, who is flying in and breaking the siege of Deir al-Azor? Deir al-Azor had been attacked 200 times before finally the siege was broken. And in any event, the people of Syria, they fought with such enormous heroism, and it reminded me very much of the Battle of the Alamo, where you had a handful of people who just fought to the death. But towards the end, where Deir ez-Zor was about to fall to the Syrian army, the United States we intervened on behalf of ISIS, the terror group ISIS, and we launched a very lengthy airstrike that was designed. There was sort of a bottleneck, kind of a narrow area within the part that was controlled by the Syrian government forces. And ISIS wanted to break through. They had never been able to break through. And the United States launched hours-long air attack. It killed hundreds of Syrian soldiers. And immediately after the airstrike was lifted, ISIS was ready, and they launched their assault, and they broke the Syrian lines. And that never could have happened were it not for a massive American operation to bomb and to break the Syrian lines on behalf of ISIS, the group that we said was the reason that we had to flood troops over there. And so this was the history of what was going on. It was a very dark chapter in American history.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding us of how we got here. And I think one of the greatest disrespects of Al-Jawani coming to Washington and going to the Oval Office was how close it was to Veterans Day or Artemis Day. I think that was a real slap in the face to the service members who have fought in these conflicts in Southwest Asia. And we're told to go after, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, the likes, and to do so because it would do it over there, because it would come over here. And then, now we have our president shaking hands with one of the former heads. My heart goes out to the service members that battle with, the trauma that they endured in those conflicts, and questioning whether it was worth it or not. And we live in a time where, we have the upwards, I think, 17 service members kill themselves every single day. We have, homeless veterans who are, turning to substance abuse from, mental illness that's not being addressed from their time. And I think that this meeting so closely coincided with Veterans Day was such a, I don't know if it was pure incompetence or I don't know. I wouldn't like to say it was malice, but for them not to look at a calendar and be like, let's push this back a few months or something, maybe that might be a bit better. And I don't see much people kind of addressing it from that angle, that this is really insulting to a lot of our veterans who, sacrificed their lives and, their time to doing what their country wanted them to do, which is go into these areas and fight these so-called terrorist groups that now we, like you said, that some articles are saying are, applauding Trump for being cozy with our enemies. But I think that is, there's a different picture when you have service members who have fought and died going against these type of enemies, and now we're welcoming them with open arms. I think it's a bit tragic, and I appreciate you kind of giving us an overview of how we truly got here and some of your insights in meeting with Bashar al-Assad, that we weren't supposed to be enemies. We could have just coexisted and let them have their country and their set of rules, and we kind of worry about ourselves. So I appreciate that, and I just want to pass it over to you for any final thoughts before we close out for the morning.
Yes, and I think also it's a tremendous slap in the face to all of the families who lost loved ones
Mhm.
during 9/11. Um, they they were told, well, we're gonna get even with the people who caused it, and we very carefully defended Saudi Arabia from any sort of criticism, despite the fact that it was the operation came out of Saudi Arabia, and it was facilitated by the Saudi embassy in the United States in Washington, and so it was a very, very dark chapter that is very little understood because the media was so united. When I took my trip over to Syria, it became global news. The fact that somebody was sort of breaking this wall of silence, and I had sent a letter to President Assad. Actually, the letter is what first made national global news, because I thanked I thanked the Syrian Arab Army. I wrote it to President Assad, and I said, I thank the Syrian Arab Army for their gallant rescue of the people along the Kalaman mountain range, which separates Syria and Lebanon. And there was a group of Al Qaeda that had ravaged that area. They had engaged in great amount of rape, and there were women who were committing suicide because they knew the way that these people operated and what was coming. And it was actually in major news publications about all of the women who were committing suicide rather than submit to all of these jihadists. And the jihadists had captured 13 Catholic nuns, and I especially thanked President Assad for their heroic action at the end of this operation, in which they killed all of the leadership of this group, and they were able to capture and rescue all 13 of the Catholic nuns. It was just a magnificent operation. And so when I sent that letter, the global media, it was like if the president had announced it or something. It was just nobody was allowed to tell the truth about this because the truth was so dark and so evil, and nobody was allowed to reveal the fact that the Syrians were very heroic in what they were doing and that they were helping Christians. You weren't supposed to acknowledge the war against Christians that was taking place, and the fact that we were on the side against the Christians.
Mhm.
So it was a very fascinating period, and one that left you with the feeling that our national military operation and our planning. I'm not talking about the people who fight, who are wonderful people. I've been there and I've done that. My radio men were killed right beside me trying to rescue some Marines. I was wounded. And so, those people are doing what they're told, but it's the people in the State Department, in the White House, National Security Council, who are responding to pressures from foreign nations. Our foreign policy is not American first. It is too often it is Israel first, or other groups first. So anyway, I just thought we'd take a little while today and do that. We haven't had time to delve into the latest on Ukraine, so perhaps we can pick up from there and talk
Mhm.
about that a little bit later.
Certainly, yeah. That also needs attention as well. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and I would encourage you all to join us next week to focus on the news. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Morgan.